Tonight, the state is taking the next step toward appointing a possible emergency manager for the city of Detroit. A new report confirms that the city will run out of cash by April. And now the race is on to see if the city can dig itself out of this financial crisis before the state is forced to take over. Good evening to you. I'm Carolyn Clifford.
And I'm Dave Llewellyn. This preliminary review that was sent to Governor Snyder outlines the troubles Detroit is facing.
It shows the city has a mounting debt problem, significant cash flow problems, and has not been able to file an adequate deficit elimination plan.
Investigator Bill Proctor joins us with a closer look at this financial mess. Bill, what can you tell us?
Well, there are a long list of problems with what's going on inside the city. With today's document, the state treasurer, Andy Dillon, tells the governor Detroit is in enough financial trouble that a review team should take a closer look at the city's books. And yes, it is the next step, but does not guarantee the appointment of an emergency manager. In fact, the review will occur while Mayor Dave Bing, the city council, and unions continue efforts to address the serious financial problems there. Detroit's mayor, city council, and others stood together to insist there's no need for outside help, but only the announcement of quick action from Lansing has driven them back to the bargaining tables to hammer out real changes to balance budgets, address huge debts, and at the same time provide services for Detroit citizens. But what about the claim that state government owes Detroit over $200 million from a deal to reduce city taxes back in the late 90s? Treasurer Dillon says, in a way, it's true.
An agreement was reached with the city where they would receive a minimum level of revenue sharing payments, which, if they would agree to lower their income tax rates. That agreement was honored for about 6 years. And then when the state was going through serious financial difficulties, there was a reduction in revenue sharing for all communities that receive statutory revenue sharing, in Detroit was part of that. The amount that is owed under that original deal back in 1997 is, in fact, about $224 million.
Yes, that's good news on one hand. The reality may be difficult to accept. Fact is, Dillon says, state government is under no obligation to pay what previous government leaders promised more than a decade ago.
It's pretty consistent under Michigan law that a legislature today and a governor today can't bind subsequent legislatures to spending commitments.
And if it becomes clear that Detroit will run out of cash, as Ernst & Young predicted by April of next year, is the state ready to find the money needed to cover short-term needs?
In terms of advancing more monies to the city, that is something that the legislature would have to approve and the governor obviously sign. It's not a done deal. We're working with the city now to see what we can do, so it's a work in progress.
So Dillon says there are what he termed some other emergency mechanisms to find money for the city, but he didn't call them loans or funds, but financial help seems to be available through the state. First-time short-term financing, he called it. But first things first, the financial review of the cities is coming next month. City leaders hope that their efforts will be enough and provide enough progress so that they will fix the finances before the 60 or 90-day review process is completed. Bill Proctor, 7 Action News.
All right, thanks a lot, Bill. Mayor Dave Bing says the formal review is not unexpected and nothing in today's findings came as a surprise. He also says, quote, I firmly believe that the remedy to the city's financial crisis is my plan to seek savings of $102 million for this fiscal year and $258 million in the fiscal year 2012-2013. The mayor goes on to say key components of my plan include structural reforms in health care and pensions, work rule changes, and wage reductions. We will continue to negotiate with union leadership with a goal of forging an agreement real soon. A statement by City Council President Charles Pugh says, I believe in the process currently underway with the mayor's office, council, and unions all working together. He concludes, from this process, I believe we will ultimately avoid a consent agreement or an emergency manager. And tonight, local pastors are also weighing in on this latest development.
They say it's only giving them more momentum in their plans to protest an emergency manager in Detroit. 7 Action News reporter Anu Prakash tells us about their plans from the city's west side.
This ups the ante, and this is going to only galvanize and push the community to come together even more.
That's the reaction from Reverend Charles Williams II on the news that Detroit appears to be getting a step closer to having an emergency manager. Pastor Williams and Pastor David Bullock are among those leading the fight against it.
Over 40% of the African American vote will be devalidated when the emergency financial manager, if an emergency financial manager comes to Detroit.
We believe elected officials should make hard and tough decisions, but we voted for our elected officials. We voted for the mayor. And just like the federal government can't come in and send an emergency manager to take over the governor's office, the governor shouldn't be able to come in and put an emergency manager in the mayor's office.
Action News spoke with Detroit City Council President Pro Tem Gary Brown. He says the findings of the preliminary review were predictable and believes the next review will say the same thing.
Well, I'm hoping over the next 60 days, the findings, we already know what they'll be before the formal gets started. Severe financial stress. The city must come up with a plan to deal with the issue, and then that plan needs to operate in the environment of a consent agreement so that we have the tools necessary in order to execute the plan and get us back on sound financial footing.
A consent agreement would give city leaders some power in the process. Meantime, as this all plays out, these pastors are getting ready for a protest outside the governor's house next month.
We do not want the emergency financial manager bill.
And to prepare for that, they're asking anyone who's against an emergency manager to join them for a strategizing session tomorrow at 11 a.m. here at Bethany Baptist Church on West Chicago. In Detroit, Anu Prakash, 7 Action News.
All right, thanks a lot, Anu. So what's the next step in the state's process to evaluate Detroit's finances? Well, now that the preliminary review is done, the governor is expected to appoint a financial team that will look over the finances and will have 60 days to report to the governor on their findings. After that, if the governor decides the city is in financial stress, he has 10 days to determine if he wants to put the city in receivership and appoint an emergency manager. Action News and WXYZ.com will bring you any new developments in the city's financial crisis as soon as anything happens. Dave?